Hi, hello, welcome. Welcome back to another Onkruid video. Welcome back to another unedited Soulstone Survivors video. Welcome back to, well, not welcome back to, but welcome to a little episode in map 2 without any curses. We might go for an overlord mode or an endless mode, at least like one cycle, but I just wanted a very chill, laid-back experience. Chill and laid-back so that I could focus on using my speech correctly, not saying too much, leaving breaks in between words so that you don't hear me breathe into the mic excessively, and try to, yeah, just not make any mistakes in terms of commentary. Also try to give some well thought out commentary. Think about what I want to say. First topic is the build we are going. We are playing with the Elementalist. Starts off with a beam, of course, a little beam of lightning rather. It's already of the elemental variety, of the elemental kind. And all I want to do is, with singular focus, make sure that we get just an inventory full of beams, or a taskbar, a hotbar, an action bar, that all of our active abilities are beams. It's a classic build, it's a build we've done before in the Onkruid channel. It's a build that a lot of other Soulstone Survivors players will definitely go. I think it's probably also... You're a funny little fella, are you? It's also, I think, a build that a lot of people will immediately think of when they get the singular focus rune. I think they will immediately think like, what ability would be fun to have 5 of? Oh, I know, different types of beams. We don't need movement speed because we are in the easiest curse difficulty, so that basically means that it's going to be a free win, nonetheless, whatever type of upgrades we choose, really. But movement speed is not on our priority list for now, because we want beams and we want just a little bit more damage. We don't need the movement speed. How have you guys been doing? I've been doing a-okay. It's been a minute since I've recorded some Soulstone, although it might have been only 2 days at least. I used to like almost exclusively record Soulstone, and that would fill up most of my YouTube days. I would most of the time record multiple episodes in an evening, but now that I've kind of had a large backlog for a while in this game, the necessity of such intense, high-octane recording sessions has kind of resided a little bit, has been a bit lessened, it has been a bit lower. It's not needed for me to really grind endlessly throughout the entire night, producing 15 Soulstone episodes in one sitting, because we already have a bunch of them lined up. Which means that also, usually I would always, I think, talk about some of the same topics. And you would think that that would mean that now, after not recording for a while, I would have some new material to talk about. No, not true. Not true at all. Some interesting things happened at work today, though. I had, first of all, a session with a client, a female client in almost her 50s with ADHD. Getting that diagnosis that is normally like kind of reserved for children and young people on an older age was a bit weird for her, but it was also an eye-opener. It explained a lot of things that she experienced earlier in her life, and it explains why she has difficulty now with doing things like her work and her education and stuff like that, because she's trying to re-educate herself into a different branch of work after experiencing some malicious practices by higher ups in her normal workspace where she used to work. That's why she now wants to diversify into a different branch. After that, I had a diagnostic meeting together with a client and her father. It was a meeting in terms of ADHD, and we conducted a diagnostical interview for ADHD in adults to see whether the symptoms of concentration, or more precisely lack of concentration, and impulsivity and hyperactivity are multicast, are in her life right now and are considered a burden for her, actually cause like harm, and also whether they were available in her life, or whether they were present in her life rather, before her 12th year, before she was 12 years old. Those are requirements for the diagnosis of ADHD to be labeled onto someone. Those two, well, all those symptoms need to be present in those 2 periods, and also the burden, the suffering the impact needs to be felt on two separate domains, like for example on the domain of work and the domain of self-esteem, or the domain of family, or the domain of friends, or the domain of school, all those different things. And it was interesting. It's not something I sought to do or I set out to do once I graduated, but I am broadening my horizon and thinking outside of the box a little bit. And this part of the diagnostic interview is, or of the diagnostic procedure rather, is a bit easy because the specific instrument we used is more like a checklist, really. It's kind of a checklist that you then go through step by step with your client and one of their parents. And it makes it easy. It's very structured. It's very streamlined. You have the questions that you can literally read to make it as structured and as, what should we call it? Yeah, as structured as possible, as repeatable as possible, to make it as predictable as possible, as replicatable as possible, just to make sure that you become the exact same results that another tester or another psychologist would also become if they administer the same test. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Replicability and stuff like that. Validity and also reliability. All psychometric characteristics of tests, but I'm not going to bore you with that because that's one of the least interesting subjects that I have seen in my entire education as a clinical psychologist, in my own opinion, so I'm not going to bore you guys with that side of the story. And then afterwards, and this is a bit crazy, I was in for a little surprise. I knew I had a client at 6 still, and I normally had one at 7 as well, in the evening that is. So PM, yeah, that's right. The client at 7, so from 7 until 8, had already sent me an email like, hey, I'm not gonna get there, some things came up last minute, I hope that's okay. And it's all fine, of course, if she doesn't turn that into a habit, because then I will have to start charging her, sadly, because we have a policy in clinical psychology and in most group practices around here that, well, 48 hours beforehand is like the deadline to make sure that you let someone know that you're not going to come, because somebody with a full agenda can then reschedule another patient to make sure that that hour gets filled, or they have enough time to make sure that they have something else to do. But for me, for example, if I didn't have my other patient at 6 and I stayed at the workplace until like 6, and then at 6 she messaged me like, oh, I'm not gonna get there today, that would suck a bit, because that would mean that I waited an entire day at my workplace for nothing, really. Not that I don't vibe with my colleagues, we're all having a blast together. That makes working fun, it makes it a hype place to be, and it makes me enthusiastic to head over there always, because my colleagues are so much fun. Either way, I was in for a bit of surprise. I knew I had a client on 6, and at 4 one of my colleagues was all of a sudden like, oh, Vincent, your client is here. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, cool. Who? Because I was like, I don't have a meeting until 6. My other client of today cancelled. I know that I have a meeting on Thursday at 4, but not Tuesday at 4, right? I don't have a session planned with anybody. And apparently, and this was the first time it happened, I just completely forgot to put it in either one of my agendas. It wasn't in my own personal agenda, where I kind of make sure that I have an overview of everything I need to do for the week. Also my private stuff, the meetings with friends and my girlfriend and stuff, for example. But it was also not in the professional agenda, in the kind of the website that we use in that practice, if you will, to make sure that everybody can see each other's agenda and stuff, and everybody can, if needed, documents about patients can be shared, which is not automatically shared, of course, because that would not be in agreement with the sacred privacy, rather, of our job. It's of course not okay if everybody would just be able to read everything we have to say about every of our clients, or every single one of our clients, rather. But yeah, I did not write it down anywhere, so it was kind of a shocker for me. What I did was, I used some of the material that I actually give to my patients to make sure that I stayed calm in the moment. For a second, I was like, all right, this is crazy, but here's my number, so call me maybe. And then I just took a couple of very deep breaths, a breath or 3, while I was quickly going over the notes that I had made after writing the report of our previous session. I try to include a little note for the next time of things I definitely shouldn't forget to talk about. And then otherwise for the other things, I know that they will come up automatically throughout the session while I'm being present in the here and now. So I was like, okay, Vincent, bit of a surprise, but you got this. There's no reason to turn her down or turn her away. I definitely feel competent enough to see her right now. I think we will make it into a productive session. And wouldn't you know it, it was, in my opinion, maybe even one of our most productive sessions yet. We really got down to her feelings and how she felt things in her body. Whereas normally it was always more of a rational discourse between the two of us. Now we really were talking about a bit deeper layers of her experiencing of the world. Because there's a certain thought layer in which you experience the world, but there's also a deeper layer, an experiencing layer. A layer filled with feelings, emotions, impressions, sensations. And that was really like the layer we hit. We struck gold today. We were mining for 4 sessions already, or maybe 3. Yeah, 3 sessions and 1 intake conversation. And then now in the 4th session we struck gold, which is still quite fast because psychotherapy is normally an egregious and a long process. You need a certain amount of belligerence to really make sure that you have the motivation to keep on coming every single week or every single 2 weeks, whatever agreement you have with your therapist. But yeah, you need to be able to work hard for prolonged periods of time without giving up, because things get hard. And I'm so proud of my client for keeping on coming, and then today being there as well and really digging a bit into her feelings, into the feeling side of things. It also makes it a lot more fun for you as a therapist, because sometimes you can get lost in the details if somebody is just spewing out factitious detail about their life after factitious detail about their life. When people are talking about feelings, that gives you like this access, this open gate towards really experiencing empathy in the here and now, and really trying to feel what they are feeling. That's one of the most beautiful aspects of therapy, in my opinion. It's hard to do when somebody is purely cognitively discussing what has happened in their life. For example, if somebody is like, yeah, we had a party at work, but I went home early because, well, I had no one to talk to, so that was a bit boring. And it's a very different story when someone says, I just felt like incredibly lonely. I felt out of place. I felt really cold and I felt ignored. I felt invisible. I felt like I was being engulfed by a certain darkness and there was no light point around me. Everybody was just having fun, everyone but me. That's a very different story, right? You can feel that. And the second type of story gives you a lot more subject material to then talk about. Because, well, if they were bored, you're like, all right, and what about the other people bored you? And then they will probably say something like, yeah, they just didn't talk about anything interesting. They were all talking about very materialistic things and talking about work. And I didn't want to talk about work at that moment. Nobody was talking about their hobbies. And if they were talking about their hobbies, it was not interesting. They were bland hobbies, you know? That kind of things can come up. But in the second story, like, wow, that's heavy, man. The darkness, you feel encapsulated by darkness. It sounds to me also like you felt like you were a little bit in a bubble separated from everything around you, and everything was a bit dimmed. Nothing really reached your senses, right? You were stuck behind a screen, whereas you felt like it was you versus all the other people. And that's more beautiful work, right? That's something with emotion, something with feeling, something real, something that the person will then be like, yeah, absolutely, or hopefully will be like, or she will be like, no, that was actually not the case at all. Hopefully she will be like that. Hopefully it's safe enough in our therapeutic alliance, in our space that we share together, for her to correct me if I'm wrong, because I am always trying to interpret her feelings, and that's of course difficult for me. Yeah, that's a lot different. And like loneliness, wow, how is that? Loneliness, that must feel harrowing, considering, well, you were in the midst of all those people, of all those colleagues, all those people you know, and still you felt loneliness. How was that for you? Do you think that that's possible, that you feel loneliness even when you're in between people? And when they would then say, no, now that you mention it, that's not possible, I would say, but let me tell you that it is, because there is social loneliness, where you really don't have any people around you, but there's also emotional loneliness. A lot of people don't know about this, where sure, you're surrounded by a whole bunch of people, you're not physically, factually alone, but you feel alone. And that is another type of loneliness that can also come up. It's a class, a very interesting class we had when I was studying, and it's a class in the lecture series of lessons in psychology for the 21st century. A bunch of different topics, for example, burnout, giving elderly people meaning in life, on which I made the video. social psychology lectures as well by our social psychology professor from earlier in the education, and one of those sessions was also about, what was I talking about? Yeah, about loneliness, about the two different types of loneliness. Well, about multiple things about loneliness, and how loneliness is often also experienced. Oh, this is great. I feel so proud that I can remember some of the things from that lecture, even though it has already been 2 years ago, because that means that I really, really took something from it and I can use that in my clinical practice. But the experiences of loneliness often arise in life periods or in certain events in your life where a whole bunch of changes are happening. For example, you can feel lonely when you switch schools, or when you change from elementary school into high school, or from kindergarten into elementary school, or from high school into higher education, or when you move, when your parents have to move for work and you have to move with them, for example. Especially in like tumultuous periods where you are kind of being swept away by life a little bit, if you will. You're not really in control of what's happening to you, and it feels like life is already kind of tsunamiing over you. The feeling of loneliness can also come as a wave that washes you away, and especially washes all your positive feelings and emotions away. And it can also mean that those people start to, because of self-fulfilling prophecies, exclude them from future events that could normally counter their loneliness. To give a bit of a more specific example that illustrates that, if you are lonely, you can, for example, feel like when somebody invites you to go to a concert with them, you feel like, oh, they're just doing that out of petty feelings. They're just feeling sympathy with me because they know I'm such a poor, lonely little boy, and I'm such a loner, I'm such a loser. I'm not gonna join them. They're probably just gonna make fun of me. And of course, that keeps the loneliness intact. It even elongates the loneliness. It strengthens the feelings of loneliness because you don't go and take the opportunities presented to you to actually counter the loneliness. It's a very harrowing problem, and it happens a lot in youth, in young adults, and in teens, because they also experience those life periods more often where there are like multiple changes going on at all times. As soon as you start working, your life becomes a bit more stable, or for most people it does at least. It becomes a bit more stable, a bit more predictable. Not that there's horses involved or anything, haha, the word stable, okay. But it becomes a bit more predictable and stuff, and a bit less drastic changes happen. So, because loneliness happens mostly in periods in your life where drastic changes are happening, then, well, when they are not happening, it's quite logical that loneliness happens less. Yeah, those are some of the things that I remember from that lecture. I'm thinking about whether there is another thing that I remember, but not necessarily. I think those were like the most important parts. I think just in general, if you're a psychologist and your client experiences loneliness, really openly discuss it. Don't see it as like an awkward topic of conversation, because, for example, it could also be that your client is just not that well socially adjusted and they experience loneliness because other people might find them weird a little bit. But it's your task as a therapist to not find them weird, to accept them as they are and see all of their quirks as some form of talent or strength as well, and not further indulge in making them lonely by, for example, not talking about the subject so that they feel lonely in their feelings of loneliness. But now we're getting into deeper topics. Either way, I remember that I found that class interesting, and that whenever I was reading through my college notes to study for the semester, when I was to study for the exam, when I was not paralyzed by fear and lying on my sofa because of my fear of failure, I remember that whenever that class came up in my rereading of my summary, I was always very happy, because it was well explained, it was quite easy, or at least it was like palpable, you know? It was relatable. I was capable of really kind of not experiencing but showing empathy towards people that probably show those feelings, because it was understandable. It really was understandable how those people felt that way. And you also experience sometimes like, all right, I'm surrounded by a bunch of people that, and still I feel lonely, I feel alone, and to be validated in those feelings is also just very nice. And that's what I've learned in this first month. It's not over yet, but it's coming to a close of being a full-time kind of therapist, even though I'm really just a clinical psychologist, but it's actually kind of the same as therapy, that giving your clients validation, motivating them, making sure they realize that they are actually doing well, they are doing good, even if they only did their task on 4 out of 7 days. Get rid of that only. You got from 0 out of 7 to 4 out of 7 days. That's an insane accomplishment. Be proud of yourself. Celebrate your victories. Make sure that they are cemented in your mind as positive learning experiences, where you know in the future, like, hey, but I was able to transform my behavior so well, so efficiently in the past, I'm gonna be able to do it again right now. Make sure that you celebrate your victories. And when your therapist is like, yeah, you should do that, don't immediately bounce that off and be like, no, but I wanted to go for 7 out of 7 and I only got 4 out of 7. I'm so bad at it. I'm so worthless. We can't move on with another subject now because I haven't perfected the previous one yet. No, absolutely not true. I think that's also something that therapists can learn something from, or that's at least my personal approach, but I don't know how it works because I have just very, very recently started to get into it. Giving therapy that is, but I feel like sometimes even when the client hasn't really figured out the previous assignment or the previous topic yet completely, it's sometimes more beneficial to already move on to the next chapter in your story together and just let them explore the previous chapter a bit on their own time again. Let them really feel whether it is something for them, whether they want to try doing it again in a different manner or something, for example, or whether they just want to try the exact same approach again to see if they can get 5 out of 7 days, maybe 6 out of 7 days, maybe even 7 out of 7 days, who knows? But let them do that on their own time. You have already played your part. Give them something new to work on as well. And this is something you have to feel. You have to tailor to every single client, because some clients will just need multiple sessions for each and every separate subject or each and every separate goal, and it's a-okay. Everybody can move at their own pace, at their own speed, but don't be scared of when you think that the client can handle it, of like in some way, shape or form introducing multiple topics or multiple scheduled tasks at once. Because then they can also choose a bit what they work on that week, and that gives them a bit more variety. And then when the one task fails or doesn't go completely as planned, they can get into the other task and make sure that they still experience gratitude towards themselves and towards the effort they have put in that week, because they were able to actually do something with the other task. 92% probably, 94%, all right, getting closer and closer. Those endless modes, of course, have a lot of enemies. Thank you very much for watching. I'm gonna go take a nap now. Hope you have a nice sleep today as well, or a nice day, depending on what time you are watching this in. One more thing, I've been thinking about switching up the upload schedule a little bit, but that's something I will then make a separate short little video about, because I feel like when I look at my YouTube analytics, most of my watchers, most of my public, most of my subscribers, thank you very much by the way, almost at 200, are from the US, and the upload times I use are actually very much mismatched with like US people's schedules. I most of the time upload at 9, because I think then that's something someone that works a bit later can watch in the morning, and I upload at 3 in the afternoon, because that's like the hour some people might start getting off work already, and it can be a nice experience to quickly then watch that. But I might shift it to those hours in American time, but that would mean that here in Belgium, I think the videos would come out at like somewhere at noon, and then somewhere at 11 at night when people get off work only. So I'm thinking about it. I'm just thinking about it. I'll see what I do with it. Thank you very much for watching. Hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.